The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew immediately it was trouble, because the return address belonged to the Pleasant Valley Estates Homeowners Association. I stood at my kitchen counter in my farmhouse just outside Healdsburg, California, staring at the envelope like it might spontaneously combust. My name, Marcus Zimmerman, was typed perfectly across the front in that sterile courier font that organizations use when they want to seem official and intimidating. I had lived on this 12-acre property for 6 years, built my small winery from scratch, and never once had the HOA contacted me about anything. Now, apparently, they had plenty to say. I tore open the envelope and pulled out 3 pages of single-spaced text. The letterhead screamed, "Urgent notice of violation," in red letters. My eyes scanned down to the meat of it. According to this document, I was in violation of multiple community covenants by operating a commercial business without proper authorization, creating excessive traffic and noise disturbances, and failing to obtain approval from the Architectural Review Board for modifications to my property. The letter demanded immediate cessation of all Vineyard tour activities, threatened daily fines of $500, and gave me 14 days to respond before they would pursue legal action. I read it again, slower this time, feeling my blood pressure rise with each paragraph. The signature at the bottom belonged to one Patricia Holbrook, HOA president. The whole thing was absurd. When I bought this property, it was specifically zoned for agricultural use. I had spent 2 years navigating the Byzantine, California winery permit system, paid thousands of dollars in fees, passed countless inspections, and finally earned my Type 02 wine grower license from the state. I was legal, legitimate, and following every regulation down to the letter. My vineyard tours were modest by Napa Valley standards. I hosted small groups on weekends, no more than 15 people at a time, showing them the vines, explaining the winemaking process, and offering tastings in my barn that I had converted into a tasting room. The tours brought in enough income to keep the operation sustainable while I built my brand. My wine, a Pinot Noir I called Zimmerman Estate Reserve, had even won a bronze medal at the California State Fair Commercial Wine Competition last year. I grabbed my phone and called my attorney, David Chen, who had helped me navigate the permit process. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "David, it's Marcus. I need your help with something insane." "Good morning to you too," he said with a chuckle. "What's going on?" I read him the entire letter, my voice getting progressively more agitated as I went through the list of alleged violations. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. "Marcus, are you actually part of Pleasant Valley Estates HOA?" he asked. "I have no idea. My property is on the edge of the development. When I bought it, the seller never mentioned an HOA, and I have never paid any dues or attended any meetings." "Okay, first thing we need to do is verify whether you are actually subject to their covenants. Send me your property deed and any documents from the purchase. Also send me that letter. I will do some research and get back to you." "How long will that take?" "Give me a couple days. In the meantime, do not respond to them directly. Let me handle all communication." I thanked him and hung up, but the damage was done. My morning was ruined, and I could not stop thinking about that letter. I walked out to my vineyard, where the vines were heavy with clusters of grapes that would be ready for harvest in another month. The morning fog was just starting to burn off, revealing the rolling hills of Sonoma County in all their glory. This place was my dream, and I was not going to let some power-hungry HOA board destroy it. The next day, I had a tour scheduled for Saturday afternoon. A group of 12 people from San Francisco had booked it weeks ago through my website. I briefly considered canceling, but David had told me not to change anything until we understood the legal situation. So Saturday arrived, and I went through my normal routine, setting up folding chairs in the tasting room, chilling bottles of my rosé, and preparing small plates of local cheese and crackers. The tour group arrived right on time, parking their cars along the gravel driveway that led to my barn. They were a cheerful bunch, mostly couples in their 30s and 40s, excited to spend a sunny afternoon learning about wine. I was just starting my introduction, standing among the vine rows and explaining how Pinot Noir grapes are particularly sensitive to climate, when I noticed a silver Lexus SUV pulling up near my house. A woman emerged from the vehicle, and even from a distance, I could tell she was on a mission. She wore pressed khaki pants, a white polo shirt, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her highlighted blonde hair was cut in that precise bob that seemed to be the official hairstyle of suburban authority figures. She marched toward my tour group with purpose, heels clicking on the packed earth between the vines. "Excuse me," she called out loudly, interrupting my explanation of canopy management. "Excuse me, this event is not authorized." My tour group turned to look at her, confused. I felt my jaw clench but forced myself to stay calm. "Can I help you?" I asked, stepping forward. "I am Patricia Holbrook, president of the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA. You were sent a cease and desist letter regarding these unauthorized commercial activities. You are currently in violation of our community covenants." "Ms. Holbrook, I received your letter and my attorney is reviewing it. This is a legal permitted winery operation on agricultural land." "Your attorney?" She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "You can have all the attorneys you want, Mr. Zimmerman. You are still bound by our HOA regulations, and you are still in violation. These people need to leave immediately." One of my tour participants, a tall man with glasses, spoke up. "We paid for this tour. Who are you to tell us to leave?" Patricia turned her glare on him. "I am the president of this community's homeowners association. This property is subject to our covenants, which prohibit commercial business operations without approval. Mr. Zimmerman here is operating illegally." "That is completely false." "Deuce," I said, my voice harder now. "I have a valid California Type 02 wine grower license. All my permits are in order, and this property is zoned for agricultural use." "Your state permits do not override our private community agreements," Patricia shot back. "You signed those covenants when you purchased this property." "I never signed anything related to your HOA." She pulled out her phone. "I am documenting this event. As of today, you are accruing fines of $500 per day until you cease these activities. I strongly suggest you think about the financial implications of defying the HOA." The tour group was looking increasingly uncomfortable. This was exactly what Patricia wanted, I realized. She was trying to humiliate me in front of customers, to make my business untenable through sheer harassment. "Ms. Holbrook," I said, keeping my voice level, "you need to leave my property right now. These people are my invited guests and you are trespassing." Her expression hardened. "I will be reporting this to the board and to the county. You have not heard the last of this." She turned and walked back to her Lexus, making a show of taking photos with her phone as she went. The SUV kicked up dust as she drove away, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. I apologized to my tour group and did my best to salvage the afternoon. Most of them were sympathetic, and a few even bought extra bottles of wine in solidarity. But the encounter had rattled me. Patricia Holbrook was not going to give up easily, and I needed answers fast. Monday morning, David called me back with news. "Okay, I have been through all your documents and done some title research. Here is the situation. Your property was originally part of the Pleasant Valley Estates development, but it was subdivided off before most of the homes were built. When the developer recorded the HOA covenants and restrictions back in 2004, they included a legal description that encompasses several parcels, including yours. However, your property was specifically rezoned for agricultural use in 2015, before you purchased it. That rezoning should exempt you from the HOA restrictions, but there is some ambiguity in California law about whether private covenants can override zoning. So what does that mean in plain English? It means we have a strong case, but the HOA could still make your life difficult. They could sue you, force you to spend money defending yourself, and create bad publicity. What we need to do is challenge their authority directly. I am going to send them a formal response laying out your legal position and demanding they cease their harassment. How long will this take? Hard to say. If they are reasonable, they will back down once they see the legal issues. If they are not, it could drag out for months. This Patricia Holbrook does not strike me as reasonable. Then we prepare for a fight." David sent his letter the next day. It was a masterpiece of legal language, politely but firmly explaining that my property was outside the HOA's jurisdiction, that my winery operation was fully licensed and compliant with all state and county regulations, and that any continued harassment would be met with legal action. He copied it to the entire HOA board and the association's registered agent. The response came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I received another letter, this time announcing an emergency HOA meeting to discuss my continued violations. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the Pleasant Valley Estates Community Center. While I was not technically required to attend, David advised me to show up and make my case directly to the board. Thursday evening, I drove the 3 miles to the Pleasant Valley Estates development. It was one of those upscale suburban communities that had sprouted up all over Sonoma County in the early 2000s, full of beige stucco houses with tile roofs and 3-car garages. The community center was a small building near the entrance with a meeting room that could hold maybe 50 people. When I arrived, there were already 24 residents seated in folding chairs, whispering to each other and casting curious glances my way. Patricia Holbrook sat at a table in the front, flanked by 4 other board members. She was dressed like she was heading to a country club in a navy blazer and pearl necklace. When she saw me enter, her expression could have curdled milk. The meeting started with typical HOA business, discussion of landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. I sat in the back and waited. Finally, 40 minutes in, Patricia announced they were moving to new business and invited me to come forward. I walked to the front of the room, acutely aware of all the eyes on me. David had prepared a short statement, and I had copies of my winery permit and zoning documentation. "Good evening," I started. "My name is Marcus Zimmerman. I own and operate Zimmerman Estate Winery on Ridgeview Road, just outside this development. I understand there are concerns about my Vineyard tour operation, so I wanted to address them directly." Patricia interrupted immediately. "Mr. Zimmerman, you were sent a cease and desist letter nearly 2 weeks ago. Rather than complying, you have continued your unauthorized activities." "Ms. Holbrook, my activities are not unauthorized. I have a valid Type 02 wine grower license from the California Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control. I held up the framed license. I have county permits for my tasting room. My property is zoned for agricultural use. I am in full compliance with all applicable laws." "You are not in compliance with our HOA covenants," she countered. "That is because I am not part of your HOA. My property was rezoned before I purchased it, which exempts it from your restrictions." A man on the board, middle-aged with thinning hair, raised his hand. "I am Roger, the treasurer. Mr. Zimmerman, our attorney reviewed the property records. Your parcel is listed in the original covenant filing. That makes you subject to our rules." "Your original covenant filing predates the agricultural rezoning," I explained. "California law is clear that zoning takes precedence over private covenants when there's a conflict. I am operating a legal agricultural business on agriculturally zoned land." Patricia's face was flushing red. "This is ridiculous. You're running a commercial entertainment venue in a residential area. We have residents complaining about traffic, noise, and parking issues every weekend." "Who is complaining?" I asked. "My nearest neighbor is half a mile away. My tours have 12 to 15 people, arriving in 4 or 5 cars. There is no noise beyond normal conversation. I would love to speak with anyone who has specific concerns." A woman in the audience raised her hand. "I live on Meadow Lane, and I have never had any problem with the winery. I actually think it is nice having it nearby." Another person spoke up. "Same here. I did not even know the tours were happening until I got the email about this meeting." Patricia looked furious. "The complaints were submitted confidentially to protect the privacy of residents." "That is convenient," I said, "because I suspect there are no actual complaints. This seems to be about control rather than any legitimate impact on the community." "How dare you?" Patricia sputtered. "I have served this community for 8 years. Everything I do is to protect property values and quality of life." Roger, the treasurer, looked uncomfortable. "Patricia, maybe we should have our attorney review this more carefully. If his property is actually exempt from the covenants, we could be opening the HOA up to liability by pursuing this." "His property is not exempt," Patricia insisted, "and even if there is some legal ambiguity, we have a duty to enforce our rules consistently. If we let Mr. Zimmerman do whatever he wants, what message does that send to other residents?" A third board member, an older woman with gray hair, spoke up. What message does it send if we harass someone who is running a legal business? I am not comfortable with this. The meeting devolved into argument, with the board members clearly divided. Patricia tried to maintain control, but it was obvious she did not have unanimous support. After 20 minutes of back and forth, Roger made a motion to table the issue pending a legal review. It passed 3-2, with Patricia voting against it and looking like she wanted to flip the table. As the meeting adjourned, several residents came up to me and apologized for the situation. A few said they had actually been meaning to book a tour. Patricia, meanwhile, gathered her papers and stormed out without making eye contact with anyone. I thought that might be the end of it, but I was wrong. Patricia Holbrook was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. The following week, I received a notice from the Sonoma County Code Enforcement Office. Someone had filed a complaint alleging that I was operating a commercial venue without proper permits, creating safety hazards, and violating setback requirements for buildings. An inspector was scheduled to visit my property in 3 days. I called David immediately. "This has Patricia written all over it," I said, pacing my kitchen. "She is trying to use the county to shut me down." "Probably," David agreed. "But the good news is that you actually are in compliance with county codes, right?" "As far as I know, yes. I passed all their inspections when I built the tasting room." "Then let them inspect. Make sure you have all your permits and documentation ready. Be cooperative and professional. If everything checks out, this will actually strengthen your position against the HOA." The inspector arrived on Friday morning. Her name was Linda Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a clipboard and a measuring tape. I showed her around the property, explaining my operation and providing copies of all my permits. She measured setbacks, checked fire extinguishers, examined my electrical panel, and asked detailed questions about my septic system and water supply. The inspection took 2 hours. At the end, Linda sat in her truck completing her report while I waited nervously by the barn. Finally, she climbed out and walked over. "Mr. Zimmerman, I've reviewed your entire operation. You have all the required permits, and everything is in compliance with county codes. I'm going to close this complaint as unfounded." Relief washed over me. "Thank you. I appreciate your thoroughness." "Between you and me," she said, lowering her voice, "we get HOA complaints like this all the time. Someone gets into a feud and they try to weaponize code enforcement. It is a waste of everyone's time. You keep doing what you are doing, and if anyone gives you trouble, you have my report on file." After Linda left, I allowed myself to feel optimistic. The county had cleared me. The HOA board was divided. Surely Patricia would realize this was a losing battle and back off. I should have known better. That weekend, I had another tour scheduled, this one for a bachelorette party. 8 women arrived Saturday afternoon in high spirits, ready to taste wine and enjoy the vineyard. We were halfway through the tour, walking between the vine rows while I explained the upcoming harvest, when 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up in a patrol car. My heart sank. The bachelorette party fell silent, suddenly worried they had done something wrong. I excused myself and walked over to meet the deputies. "Are you Marcus Zimmerman?" the first deputy asked. He was young, probably in his late 20s, with a buzz cut and a serious expression. "Yes, that is me. Is there a problem?" "We received a call about an illegal gathering on this property. The caller said there was excessive noise and possible alcohol violations." "This is a legal winery tour," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have all the required licenses to serve alcohol on the premises. These are paying customers who booked the tour through my website." The second deputy, an older woman with sharp eyes, looked around at the quiet vineyard and the small group of confused women. "Does not look like much of a disturbance to me." "Can I see your alcohol license?" the first deputy asked. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of my Type 02 license, then walked them to the tasting room where the physical license was displayed on the wall. They examined it carefully. "This all looks legitimate," the female deputy said. "Mr. Zimmerman, we are going to clear this call. But I have to ask, has someone been harassing you?" I explained the situation with the HOA, the cease and desist letter, the code enforcement complaint. Both deputies shook their heads. "We have dealt with this HOA before," the younger deputy said. "They call us out for the most ridiculous things. Last month they reported a teenager for riding a skateboard on the sidewalk." If this continues, you might want to document everything and consider getting a restraining order, the female deputy advised. Making false reports to law enforcement is not a joke. After they left, I apologized profusely to the bachelorette party. They were understanding, and the bride-to-be actually thought it made the tour more memorable. But I was shaking with anger. Patricia had crossed a line by calling the sheriff. This was not just HOA overreach anymore. This was harassment. That evening, I sat down and wrote out a detailed timeline of everything that had happened. Every letter, every meeting, every incident. David had told me documentation was crucial if this escalated further, and it was clearly escalating. Monday morning, David called me with news. "Marcus, I did some digging into Patricia Holbrook. She has a history of this kind of behavior. 3 years ago, she tried to force a resident to remove a vegetable garden from their front yard. It went to arbitration, and the HOA lost. 5 years ago, she filed a lawsuit against a resident who painted their house a color she did not approve, even though the color was within the HOA guidelines. That case was dismissed. She has cost the HOA tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees pursuing personal vendettas. Why do people keep electing her president? A lot of residents do not pay attention to HOA politics. She runs unopposed most years. But here's the important part. I spoke with a board member, Roger, the treasurer you met at the meeting. He is fed up with Patricia's behavior. He said several board members want to vote to end the action against you, but Patricia keeps blocking it. He suggested that if you show up to the next regular board meeting with your documentation, they might overrule her. When is the next meeting? 2 weeks from now. In the meantime, do not engage with Patricia directly. Let everything go through me. Those 2 weeks were tense. I kept expecting another shoe to drop, another inspection or sheriff's visit, but things stayed quiet. My tours continued without incident, and I focused on preparing for harvest, which was now just 3 weeks away. The night of the HOA board meeting, I arrived early with a folder full of documents: my property deed, the agricultural zoning confirmation, my winery permits, my alcohol license, the county inspection report, and the sheriff's incident report from the false call. David came with me, dressed in a suit and looking every bit the professional attorney. The meeting room was more crowded than last time. Word had gotten out that there was drama, and suburban residents love drama more than they love complaining about property taxes. Patricia sat at the board table looking like she had just eaten something sour. When she saw me walk in with David, her expression went from sour to thunderous. The meeting started with routine business again. Patricia tried to drag things out, but Roger kept moving the agenda along. Finally, they reached the discussion of my property. "Before we begin," David said, standing up, "I would like to submit these documents to the board for review." He walked forward and handed a packet to each board member. Patricia barely glanced at hers. "We've already discussed this matter extensively. Mr. Zimmerman is in violation of our covenants, and that is final." "Actually, Patricia, it is not final," Roger said. "This is a board decision, not your personal decision. I have reviewed Mr. Zimmerman's legal position, and I think we need to seriously consider dropping this matter." "Absolutely not. If we back down now, it makes us look weak." The older gray-haired board member, whose name I learned was Eleanor, spoke up. "What makes us look weak is pursuing a baseless action and potentially exposing the HOA to a lawsuit. Mr. Zimmerman's property is clearly zoned for agricultural use. His winery is licensed by the state. We have no grounds to stop him." "We have every ground," Patricia snapped. "His property is listed in the original covenant filing." "Which was superseded by the rezoning," David interjected. "And I should add that Ms. Holbrook has engaged in a pattern of harassment against my client, including filing false complaints with county code enforcement and the sheriff's department. If this continues, we will have no choice but to pursue legal action against both the HOA and Ms. Holbrook personally." The room went dead silent. Patricia's face turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you threaten me?" she hissed. "It is not a threat, it is a statement of fact," David replied calmly. "Your actions have been documented. You have wasted public resources with false reports. You have attempted to interfere with a legal business operation. Those are serious matters." Roger cleared his throat. I move that the HOA immediately cease all actions against Mr. Zimmerman's property and issue a formal apology for any inconvenience caused. Second, Eleanor said immediately. This is outrageous, Patricia sputtered. You are undermining my authority as president. You have undermined your own authority, Roger shot back. I am calling for a vote. All in favor? 3 hands went up. Roger, Eleanor, and the third board member, a quiet man named Tom who had not said much at either meeting. Patricia and the remaining board member voted against. Motion carries 3-2, Roger announced. This matter is closed. Patricia stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward. You're all making a huge mistake. I will not stand for this. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, leaving her papers scattered across the table. In the stunned silence that followed, Eleanor turned to me. Mr. Zimmerman, on behalf of the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA, I apologize for the trouble you have been put through. This should never have happened. I nodded, still processing what had just occurred. Thank you. I appreciate that. We will send you a formal letter confirming the board's decision, Roger added, and just so you know, there is going to be a special election to recall Patricia from the presidency. This has gone too far. As I left the meeting with David, I felt like a weight had been lifted. It was over. The HOA had backed down, Patricia had been overruled, and I could finally focus on my business without looking over my shoulder. But the universe was not quite finished with this story. 3 days later, I was in my vineyard checking sugar levels in the grapes when I saw a familiar silver Lexus SUV pull up my driveway. My stomach dropped. Patricia climbed out, and this time she was not alone. A man in an expensive suit followed her, carrying a briefcase. I walked over to meet them, pulling out my phone and starting a video recording. David had told me to document any further contact. Ms. Holbrook, the HOA board voted to end this matter. What are you doing here? The board may have voted, but I have not given up, she said. Her voice had a manic edge to it. This is my attorney, Richard Blackstone. We are filing a personal lawsuit against you for creating a public nuisance and diminishing property values. The attorney looked uncomfortable. Ms. Holbrook, I advised you that this case has significant challenges. I do not care about challenges. I care about protecting my community. Mr. Zimmerman thinks he can do whatever he wants, but I'm going to prove him wrong. You need to leave my property, I said firmly, right now. We will leave when we are ready, Patricia snapped. You have destroyed the peaceful character of this neighborhood with your commercial activities. I'm half a mile from the nearest house. My tours are quiet and small. You have not presented a single legitimate complaint. I do not need to explain myself to you. Her attorney put a hand on her arm. Ms. Holbrook, we should go. This conversation is not productive. She shook him off. I'm not going anywhere until he understands that I will not tolerate this. I kept my phone trained on her. You are trespassing. Leave now, or I am calling the sheriff. Call them. I'm not afraid of the sheriff. So I did. I dialed 911, explained that I had a trespasser who was refusing to leave, and gave them my address. The dispatcher said a deputy was 8 minutes away. Patricia's attorney was pleading with her now. Ms. Holbrook, we need to go. Staying here is only making things worse. I do not care, she said, her voice rising. I'm tired of everyone telling me I'm wrong. I am the HOA president. I know what is best for this community. You were just outvoted by your own board, I pointed out. They disagree with you. They are weak, all of them. This development used to have standards, but now everyone just wants to do whatever they want. Well, I will not let that happen. The 8 minutes waiting for the sheriff felt like an hour. Patricia paced around my driveway, ranting about property values and community standards and how people like me were ruining Sonoma County. Her attorney stood by his car, clearly regretting his life choices. When the patrol car finally arrived, it was the same female deputy from before. She recognized me immediately and sighed. Mr. Zimmerman, what is going on now? I explained the situation, showing her the video I had recorded. She walked over to Patricia, who was still ranting. Madam, you need to calm down. Mr. Zimmerman has asked you to leave his property. You need to comply. I am Patricia Holbrook, president of the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA. This man is operating illegally, and I have every right to be here. No, madam, you do not. This is private property, and you are trespassing. I am giving you a lawful order to leave immediately." "This is absurd. I am not leaving." The deputy's expression hardened. "Madam, if you do not leave right now, I will arrest you for trespassing." Patricia looked at her defiantly. "Then arrest me. I am not backing down." The deputy looked at me, then at Patricia's attorney, as if hoping someone would talk sense into this woman. The attorney held up his hands. "I've advised my client to leave. She is not listening to me." "Final warning, madam," the deputy said. Patricia crossed her arms. "I am not leaving." I could not believe what I was witnessing. The deputy actually arrested her. She pulled out her handcuffs, told Patricia to turn around, and cuffed her while reading her rights. Patricia protested the entire time, but there was something almost unhinged about it now, like she had completely lost touch with reality. As the deputy put Patricia in the back of the patrol car, the attorney approached me. "Mr. Zimmerman, I apologize for this. Ms. Holbrook contacted me 2 days ago about representing her in a personal lawsuit. I reviewed the facts and told her it was not a strong case, but she insisted. I had no idea she was going to come out here and do this." "You might want to reconsider representing her," I suggested. "I already have," he said, shaking his head. "This is beyond anything I want to be involved with." After they left, I stood in my driveway trying to process what had just happened. Patricia Holbrook, HOA president, had just been arrested for trespassing on my property. It felt surreal. I called David and told him everything. "This is actually good for you," he said. "It demonstrates a pattern of obsessive behavior. If she does try to file a personal lawsuit, this incident will be part of the record. No judge is going to take her seriously." "Do you think she will actually go through with a lawsuit?" "Hard to say. She might if she is really that fixated, but it will get thrown out quickly. You have done nothing wrong." That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Patricia's face when the deputy arrested her, that wild, defiant look. What made someone so obsessed with control that they would destroy their own life over it? The next day, the story spread through Pleasant Valley estates like wildfire. Roger called me to apologize again and to let me know that the board had officially voted to begin recall proceedings against Patricia. More than that, several residents had come forward with their own stories of harassment from her over the years. The picture that emerged was of someone who had been getting progressively more extreme and dictatorial in her HOA role. But most people had just kept their heads down and dealt with it rather than fighting back. A week later, I received a formal letter from the HOA attorney, a different one than Patricia's personal lawyer. The letter stated that the HOA acknowledged I was not in violation of any covenants, apologized for the inconvenience and harassment, and agreed to reimburse me for reasonable legal fees incurred in defending against their actions. I sent the letter to David, who negotiated a settlement of $12,000 to cover his fees in my time. The HOA paid it within 30 days. Patricia, meanwhile, faced consequences. The trespassing charge stuck, and she was convicted in municipal court. She received a suspended sentence in probation, but the damage to her reputation was severe. She resigned from the HOA board before the recall election could take place. I heard through the grapevine that she and her husband were moving to Arizona, trying to start fresh somewhere else. Roger took over as HOA president and turned out to be reasonable and competent. He actually booked a tour at my winery with a group of his friends, and they bought several cases of wine. Eleanor came out separately, and we had a long conversation about how HOAs can go wrong when the wrong people get into power. My harvest that year was excellent. The grapes came in at perfect sugar levels, and the fermentation went smoothly. I produced 280 cases of my Pinot Noir and 100 cases of Rosé. The wine from that vintage turned out to be the best I had ever made, and it sold out within 8 months. The vineyard tours continued to grow. Word of mouth brought more customers, and I started getting written up in regional wine blogs. I hired a part-time employee to help with tastings on busy weekends. The business became sustainable, then profitable. But the experience with Patricia and the HOA left its mark on me. I became more active in local agricultural advocacy, joining the Sonoma County Farm Bureau and speaking at county supervisor meetings about the importance of protecting agricultural land use rights. I shared my story with other small winery owners, and it turned out I was not alone. HOA overreach was a growing problem as suburban developments expanded into wine country. The following year, I worked with a state assembly member to introduce legislation clarifying that properties zoned for agricultural use are exempt from HOA restrictions that conflict with legitimate agricultural operations. The bill passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law. It became known informally as the Zimmerman Amendment, though officially it had some boring bureaucratic title. I never saw Patricia Holbrook again after her arrest. I heard she did move to Arizona, where I assumed she probably joined another HOA board and started the whole cycle over again with some other poor homeowner. Some people never learn. Roger and I actually became friends. He was an accountant by trade, methodical and fair-minded, everything an HOA president should be. Under his leadership, Pleasant Valley Estates stopped being a source of stress for its residents. They repealed several of the more ridiculous covenant restrictions, streamlined the architectural review process, and focused on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement. 2 years after the whole ordeal began, I was featured in Wine Enthusiast magazine in an article about small family wineries in Sonoma County. The article mentioned my legal battle with the HOA, framing it as an example of the challenges facing agricultural businesses in suburban areas. After it was published, I received emails from winery owners across California thanking me for fighting back and sharing their own HOA horror stories. One email came from a woman named Sarah Anderson, who owned a small olive oil operation in Paso Robles. Her HOA was trying to shut down her farm stand, using similar tactics to what Patricia had employed against me. I connected her with David, who was able to help her successfully fight the restrictions. That led to more referrals, and David ended up developing a whole specialty practice defending agricultural businesses against HOA overreach. The truth is, what happened to me was not really about vineyard tours or property values or zoning laws. It was about power and control, about someone who had gotten so wrapped up in their little kingdom that they could not see reason anymore. Patricia Holbrook probably thought she was protecting her community, but she was really just protecting her own sense of authority. The irony is that my winery probably increased property values in the area. Having a boutique winery nearby was an amenity, something that made the neighborhood more desirable, not less. Several real estate agents started mentioning it in their listings for Pleasant Valley Estates homes, located near award-winning Zimmerman Estate Winery. Roger told me that home prices in the development had actually gone up since my business became established. I expanded my operation gradually over the next few years. I planted 2 more acres of vines, added a small wine cave for aging barrels, and built a larger tasting room to accommodate bigger groups. Every expansion required permits and inspections, which I obtained meticulously. I never wanted to give anyone ammunition to claim I was operating improperly. The winery became my legacy. I had come to Sonoma County with a dream of making wine, of building something with my own hands, and I had succeeded despite someone's best efforts to stop me. Every bottle that left my property carried that story with it, the story of persistence and principle. I also learned some valuable lessons about picking battles. When the HOA first sent that cease and desist letter, I could have panicked or gotten angry or tried to handle it myself. Instead, I brought in a competent attorney who knew the law and could advocate professionally. That decision probably saved my business. I learned that documentation is crucial. Every letter, every email, every incident recorded and filed away. When it came time to defend myself, I had evidence to back up everything I said. Patricia's downfall came largely because her own words and actions were on the record, impossible to deny or spin. I learned that institutions like HOAs are only as good or bad as the people running them. Under Patricia's leadership, the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA was a nightmare. Under Roger's leadership, it became reasonable and functional. The system itself was neutral. The humans operating it made all the difference. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for what is right matters, even when it is hard. It would have been easier to fold, to shut down the tours, to avoid the conflict. But I knew I was in the right, and backing down would have meant letting a bully win. Fighting back was not just about protecting my business, it was about principle. 3 years after that first certified letter arrived, I hosted a harvest party at the winery. Over 100 people came out, including Roger and Eleanor and several other Pleasant Valley Estates residents who had become friends and supporters. We crushed grapes the old-fashioned way, with people stomping them in large barrels, and everyone got purple feet and laughed until their sides hurt. As the sun set over the vineyard that evening, I stood on my porch with a glass of my own wine and looked out over the rows of vines heavy with fruit. This place was my dream realized, despite obstacles I never could have anticipated. The HOA had tried to end my vineyard tours, but my permits were valid. I had fought back, and in the end, they had even paid my legal fees. It was not the outcome Patricia Holbrook had envisioned when she sent that first threatening letter, but it was justice, and it was right. The business continued to grow. I hired 2 more part-time employees, both local college students studying viticulture. I taught them about winemaking, about the art and science of coaxing flavor from grapes, about patience and timing and trusting the process. They were good kids, passionate about wine, and they reminded me of myself when I was younger and first falling in love with this industry. I entered my wines in more competitions and won more medals. A bronze at the San Francisco Chronicle Wine Competition, a silver at the Orange County Fair, a gold, finally, at a regional competition in Monterey. Each medal brought more customers, more recognition, more validation that what I was building mattered. The vineyard became a gathering place for the community. I hosted a summer concert series, bringing in local acoustic musicians to play on the lawn while people enjoyed wine and cheese under the stars. I partnered with nearby farms for harvest dinners, farm-to-table events that showcased the incredible agricultural bounty of Sonoma County. None of this would have happened if Patricia Holbrook had gotten her way. The tours would have ended, the business would have stagnated, and my dream would have withered on the vine. Instead, by standing firm on my rights and fighting back legally, I had built something meaningful and lasting. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondered if she ever reflected on what she had done, whether she recognized that her obsession with control had been her undoing. Probably not. People like that rarely develop self-awareness. She was probably in Arizona right now, serving on some HOA board there, making some other homeowner's life miserable over the color of their mailbox or the height of their fence. But that was not my problem anymore. My problem was deciding when to harvest the Syrah grapes in the back vineyard, whether to expand into sparkling wine production, and how to manage the wait list for holiday tasting reservations. These were good problems to have. The legal precedent from my case helped other small agricultural businesses in California. David told me he had referenced my situation in 3 other cases, all of which were resolved in favor of the property owners. The Zimmerman amendment was being cited in court filings and legal briefs across the state. I had inadvertently become a minor figure in agricultural law, which was not something I ever expected when I planted my first vines. Roger served as HOA president for 4 years, then stepped down to let someone else take a turn. The woman who replaced him, a retired teacher named Margaret, continued his sensible approach to governance. Pleasant Valley Estates became known as one of the better-managed HOAs in the county, a place where rules were reasonable and enforcement was fair. Several residents told me that property values had increased significantly since Patricia left, though they could not prove causation. I expanded my wine club, offering quarterly shipments to members across California and eventually across the country. The logistics were complicated, navigating different state alcohol shipping laws, but it was worth it to have a steady base of loyal customers. Some of them became friends, people I looked forward to seeing when they visited Sonoma County and stopped by for a tour. 5 years after the HOA battle, I received an email from Patricia's former attorney, Richard Blackstone. He apologized again for his brief involvement in the situation and asked if he could bring a client group to the winery for a team-building event. I agreed, and when they came out, Richard pulled me aside. "I wanted you to know," he said, "that your case changed how I practice law. I realized I had been taking on clients without really questioning whether their cause was just. After that disaster with Patricia, I became much more selective. If someone comes to me with a case that smells like harassment or abuse of process, I turn them down. You taught me an important lesson." It was gratifying to hear, evidence that the whole ordeal had maybe created some positive ripples beyond just my own situation. My parents came to visit from Ohio that year, their first trip to see the winery since I had started the tours. They stayed for a week, and I gave them the full experience. Walks through the vineyard, barrel tastings from the cave, dinners featuring wine pairings. My father, who had been skeptical when I quit my corporate job to become a winemaker, finally admitted that I had made the right choice. "I was worried you were throwing your life away," he said over dinner one evening, "but you have built something real here. I am proud of you, son." That meant more to me than any wine competition medal or positive review. My parents' approval, their recognition that my dream had been worth pursuing, was validation I did not know I needed. I started teaching classes at the local community college, an introduction to viticulture course for people interested in the wine industry. It was one evening a week, and I loved it. Sharing my knowledge with students, seeing their excitement as they learned about growing grapes and making wine, reminded me why I had fallen in love with this work in the first place. The winery became financially stable enough that I could pay myself a real salary, not just scraping by but actually living comfortably. I was able to pay down the loans I had taken out to start the business, to invest in equipment upgrades, to plan for the future with confidence. Looking back on the whole HOA situation, I could see how it had actually strengthened my business in unexpected ways. The publicity from fighting back, the legal precedent that clarified my rights, the support from the community that rallied around me, all of it contributed to the winery's success. Patricia Holbrook had tried to destroy me, but she had inadvertently helped me instead. I never wished her ill. I hope she found peace, that she learned from her mistakes, that she was not making other people miserable in her new life. But mostly, I just stopped thinking about her. She had been an obstacle, a challenge to overcome, and I had overcome it. That chapter was closed. The vineyard continued its eternal cycle: bud break in spring, flowering in early summer, veraison when the grapes changed color in late summer, harvest in fall, and dormancy in winter. Each year brought new challenges and new rewards. Each vintage was different, shaped by that year's weather and decisions made in the vineyard and the cellar. I experimented with new techniques, trying whole cluster fermentation one year, adding a small amount of stem inclusion the next. Some experiments worked brilliantly. Others were learning experiences. But that was the joy of winemaking, the endless pursuit of improvement, the knowledge that there was always more to discover. The tours remained the heart of the operation, the way I connected with customers and shared my passion. I never took them for granted, never forgot that I had fought for the right to continue offering them. Every weekend, when new guests arrived and I led them through the vineyard, explaining the growing season and the winemaking process, I felt grateful that I could do this work. Some of those tour guests became regulars, people who came back year after year, who tracked each new vintage and bought cases of their favorites. They brought friends, they spread the word, they became ambassadors for the winery. That organic word-of-mouth growth was more valuable than any advertising I could have purchased. I also became more involved in local politics, attending county supervisor meetings when agricultural issues were on the agenda, speaking up for the interests of small farmers and winemakers. My experience with the HOA had taught me that civic engagement matters, that showing up and making your voice heard can make a difference. The state assembly member who had sponsored the Zimmerman amendment invited me to Sacramento to testify when similar legislation was being considered. I stood before a committee and told my story, explaining how HOA overreach threatened legitimate agricultural businesses. The bill passed, strengthening protections for farmers and ranchers across California. 7 years after that first certified letter from Patricia Holbrook, I stood in my vineyard on a foggy morning and realized I had won. Not just the legal battle, not just the right to continue my tours, but something bigger. I had built a life I loved, a business that sustained me, a place that mattered to my community. The HOA had tried to take that away, but they had failed. My winery permit was valid, my rights were protected, and in the end, they had paid my legal fees, acknowledging through their settlement that they had been wrong to pursue me in the first place. The sun burned through the fog, illuminating the vineyard in golden light. Harvest was 2 weeks away, and the grapes were perfect, hanging heavy on the vines. This would be another good year, another vintage to be proud of. I walked back to the house to start my day, making a mental note of everything that needed to happen before the harvest crew arrived. There were bins to clean, the crush pad to prepare, yeast to order, barrels to inspect. The work was endless, but I loved every minute of it. As I poured my morning coffee, I glanced at the framed copy of my winery permit hanging on the kitchen wall. It was just a piece of paper, really, an official document with seals and signatures. But it represented something more. The right to pursue my dream, the freedom to build a life on my own terms, the protection of law against those who would abuse power to stop me. Patricia Holbrook had tried to end my vineyard tours, but my permit was valid, and now she was gone, and I was still here, making wine and welcoming guests and living the life I had chosen. That was the real victory.